In a previous video, we talked about pruning in the fall, and I was explaining why everything should wait till spring. And roses is one area where definitely I'm against pruning in the fall. And I know some of you have been pruning in the fall and you haven't had trouble, but once you understand how a rose thinks, it does make sense on waiting. And that reason is, if you've ever seen your rose in November and December, it's probably still flowering, it's probably still growing. And roses seem a lot slower to go dormant for the season. When all your other shrubs have lost their leaves and that, the roses still are looking pretty good. Actually, I think some of the fall roses are actually some of the prettiest roses of the year. They usually have better color to them, usually larger sized roses on them. But the last thing you want to do is keep that rose growing throughout the winter. And by letting the rose go dormant, so what we're talking about is the last flowers of the season, don't be deadheading. Leave those flowers on those stems. As soon as you deadhead a plant, it's telling it needs to rebloom to produce seed. And so if you're deadheading, which is great in the spring and the summer, because that's what you're wanting to do, is promote more flowers to come. If you do that in the fall, the rose will want to keep growing to produce more flowers. And that's when the rose is going to get damaged, is when it's got that new growth out there. So you want to help the rose to go to Betty Bye for the fall. You want to keep it dormant for the winter time. Quite often, at least in this area in February, we'll get kind of a warm spell. And if you have your roses on a sunny side of the house, south side of the house, you'll actually start seeing it push buds. And again, that's when a rose is going to be damaged for the winter, is when it's trying to force out new growth, and it shouldn't be. So by letting your rose go to sleep in the fall, so not pruning it at all before winter, letting the last flowers form the rose hips or just dry right on there, it's a signal to the plant that it's done for the year. And it actually helps it go into that dormant period. I know some people like to do the little cones over top of them to protect them, and some of you are pruning them down quite short, especially the hybrid teas before winter time. But if we do have a harsh winter, whether you prune in the fall or spring, the rose is going to die back a bit. To me, if you have a hybrid tea that's 3-4 feet high and it dies back a foot, you still have 2-3 feet in the spring to work with and for it to come back to life. If you had pruned it down to a foot and it died back a foot, you've lost your rose. I've worked in large gardens where there's been hundreds of roses in them, and one year did an experiment of what pruning and not pruning in the spring or fall. And we found the ones that we pruned in the spring did a lot better than the ones we pruned in the fall. Some of the ones we pruned in the fall we did lose out in a bad winter, where the spring pruned ones were still fine for the summer. So that's why I promote not pruning your roses at all. Again, if it's a climbing rose and it's kind of reaching over and scratching up against the house or maybe over a pathway that you have to get by, you might just want to cut the odd branch onto it. But don't do any of your hard pruning until spring. You need that rose to go to sleep and stay asleep for the winter time. And that applies to when you hill up your roses. And you'll hear about people that they cover up the graft area of the roses for the winter time. But I find a lot of people don't understand why they're doing it or when the best time is to do it. Most roses are grafted at the bottom. You'll see that knuckle where all the branching comes out of at the base of the rose. If you lived further north, say Ottawa and that, sometimes they plant those so that graft area is below ground level. So it helps insulate it. In this area of Ontario, we're usually planting so that graft area is above the ground level. But it is kind of the most tender part of the plants. So kind of the old school of thought was you hill up your rose in the fall, and that would help protect it for the wintertime. That area is insulated for the wintertime. But I find a lot of people, they're ready to close up their gardens by Thanksgiving, so they're hilling up their roses way too early. And if the rose is still growing, and we just said that the roses have problems or are a lot slower to go dormant in the fall, if the rose is still growing in October, beginning of November, and you're actually hilling it up, so hilling it up means we're using soil or compost or leaves and covering up that graft area. If you're hilling it up too soon, it's actually stopping that rose from going to sleep. It's keeping it growing. You want the rose to go dormant first if you're going to hill at all, and I'm not convinced that that is actually a practice that makes a difference. But if you are insistent on hilling your rose, you want to wait till that rose goes dormant And then by hilling it at that time and covering that graft area, we'll actually keep it dormant for the winter time, which we've just been talking about. That's what you want to do. So you should wait till the ground is frozen. Save a bag of soil in the basement or that, go out Christmas Eve, and that's the time to hill your roses up. So a lot of people do it way too early, but if you understand what it's actually doing, that you're actually doing more harm by doing it at that time. Again, I've tried with hilling some roses, not hilling them, same winters. I didn't find it made a much difference as far as making it through the winter. So whether that's a practice you want to do or not, make sure if you are hilling them up with compost or that in the spring, as soon as those buds start to push, that you're taking some of that soil. You can keep the compost in the garden, but just take it away from the base of the plants. But make sure if you are hilling that you're not doing it too early in the season, or you're actually doing more damage than what you are good. We want to make sure our roses are lovely for the next year. So just understand why you're doing the things you are, and it can make all the difference in your garden.